Hello and welcome to the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show live in the On Purpose Woman magazine and global community Facebook page. I'm Jenny Robertson, one of the hosts of the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show, and I'm also the founder and publisher of On Purpose Woman magazine and founder of the On Purpose Woman global community. My guests today are Venetia Bailey and Cathy Roberts, the co-leaders of the Montgomery County, Maryland chapter of Coming to the Table. Coming to the Table is an organization that brings people together to create a just and truthful society that acknowledges and seeks to heal from racial wounds of the past, from slavery, and the many forms of racism it spawned. So welcome, Venetia and Cathy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jenny.
You're welcome. I'm excited to learn more about Coming to the Table and how you all got involved in this. But first, I want to tell our viewers a little bit about each of you. Venetia Bailey is a trained sound healer, a trauma-informed leader and coach, and a STAR practitioner. STAR stands for Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience. She assists individuals with addressing trauma healing needs and building resilient strategies. Venetia has presented various workshops on racial bias, ethics, and self-care, as well as facilitated racial reconciliation and restorative justice circles. Cathy Roberts is a licensed professional counselor in Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. A racial equity educator since 2016, Cathy engages with participants in trainings and racial reconciliation circles. In 2016, she started the first Montgomery County, Maryland chapter of Coming to the Table, which she co-facilitates with Venetia. Her areas of interest include racial identity development, intergenerational racial trauma, and uncovering unconscious bias. Wow, so between the two of you, this is not new stuff, is it? At least not new in the last 5 to 7 years. And Venetia, I imagine you've been looking at this for much longer than that.
Yes.
Yes, but Cathy, you wrote an article for On Purpose Woman magazine. And so if you're watching this and you want to know more about how Cathy got into this, I'm going to have her talk about it a little bit, but it's a great article that talks more about Coming to the Table. You can see that in the May-June issue of On Purpose Woman. You wrote this article about your past, your familial past, and things that had gone on in your family, and some of the guilt that you kind of carried from that. And how did acknowledging that have you want to get more involved in actually doing this work?
Yeah, I think my whole conscious life, I was aware of being descended from enslavers on both sides of my family. I didn't know it on both sides of my family my whole life. And I think most of my life, I just wasn't ready to deal with it at all. I just wanted to sweep it under the table. And as things began heating up in the mid-20 teens, and everybody was becoming more aware of racial inequity, mostly because of police killings, I began to feel differently about it. And I wanted to understand how that history of my family had impacted me in my childhood, how slavery itself had impacted the whole history of our country and the whole enslavement and that whole caste system that Isabel Wilkerson writes about so amazingly in her book Caste. And so I guess externally the timing was right, and internally I was ready. There was something about I was ready to deal with that particular aspect of family trauma. And so I came across Coming to the Table in a book written by English women on ancestral healing. And when I saw there was a Coming to the Table in DC, which there was at the time, there no longer is, I thought, I've got to go down there. This is, it just felt like a call. And so after attending a few meetings there, it was kind of a long haul. I lived in Rockville, Maryland at the time. I decided that maybe I could start a chapter closer to home in Rockville, where I lived. And so I got with the national director, executive director, and he said, sure. And the timing was, I guess, pretty amazing. I think we started the week after the 2016 election.
Wow.
So there was a lot of concern about racism, a growing concern about racism.
Right.
So that's in a nutshell how I got into it.
In your article, you also wrote about how this hadn't really been talked about in your family, or if it was, I think you mentioned that someone would say things like, oh, we're descended from these wealthy people, but not really talking about how they got their wealth so much.
That was how my mother seemed quite proud to have married into an aristocratic family,
Mm.
which we later learned was not true. Somebody in the 1700s changed their name to one of the aristocratic families' names. We're not descended from them. But there was it isn't talked about. And even when I began talking with my mother about it, my dad passed away in 2015, so I never really talked about this with him. But even when I talked to my mother, I said to her, Mom, your great-great-grandfather was enslaving a woman just 5 or 10 miles from the Pennsylvania state line.
Mm.
I wonder if she ever escaped or wanted to escape. And my mother's response is, well, why would she do that? She was taken care of.
Wow.
So there was this complete disconnect, just a complete disconnect. My jaw dropped and I challenged her on it, and she's still living, and she's opened up to,
Good.
oh, there's more to this than she was thinking.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great story. Well, Venetia, what brought you to, did you know Cathy beforehand, or did you just kind of show up? Something got you to come to the organization.
Well, interestingly enough, I met Cathy at an expo and signed up for a weekly newsletter that she used to post, Vitality Weekly, I think was the name of it. And she had been sending out these newsletters on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden, they weren't coming anymore. So I waited, and then I sent her an email and asked her, are you still sending the newsletters? Because maybe she lost my email or something. And she said, no, but actually I'm shifting to something else. So the something else was coming to the table. And I have always thought social justice work is important. So I joined Coming to the Table, and I attended the meetings and did a little research about Coming to the Table, and realized that I resonated with their approach to anti-racism work, and I aligned with their organizational approach of peaceful dialogue, truth-telling, transformation. And so I attended the meetings, and the co-leader that was with Cathy at the time stepped down not too long after I started attending the meetings. And there was a void, and I gave it careful consideration because stepping up, those were big shoes to fill by the previous co-facilitator. But I decided to take the leap, and I volunteered to fill the gap.
Mhm.
And now we have been together almost 5 years now.
Wow.
And it has been an amazing experience of learning and growing, and as an individual and as a team.
Chance meeting, huh? Chance meeting at an expo. You think it's going to be about one thing, and it becomes about something else.
Completely.
I love that. Well, this is a national organization, correct? Coming to the Table.
Yes.
They have chapters in different places around the country. Can one of you or both of you just jump in and talk a little bit about how they got started? If you know the history, like how long have they been around, and what called them? At what point in time was it that they decided this was necessary or a good time to do it?
Well, I'll start off, and then Cathy jump in,
Sure.
to add something. And thank you for the opportunity to introduce Coming to the Table. Coming to the Table is a national organization ran mostly by volunteers, and it was founded in January of 2006. And the idea of Coming to the Table evolved from Susan, Hutchison and Will Hairston, both white descendants of prominent American slaveholding families. Susan Hutchison is a descendant of President Thomas Jefferson and his wife Martha. And Will Hairston is a descendant of a dynasty of one of the richest slaveholding families in the antebellum South. Wow. So at different times, they were invited and attended family reunions that included descendants that were enslaved by their slaveholding families. And at these reunions, they formed and built relationships, and they wanted them to continue, and they want to grow these connections. So they both also wanted to connect with other people that were descendants of the enslaved and enslavers. So they were inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream speech. And Susan and Will worked together with the linked descendants of both African and European descent. And along with their connection with the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University, they planned the first gathering. And that's how it started. Initially, there were a couple dozen people that showed up, and they listened to each other's stories and shared information and talked about how trauma impacts the bodies, the mind, the spirit. And then they decided they wanted to build a healing model that was grounded in peace building as taught and practiced at the Center for Justice and Peace Building. So that's sort of a quick synopsis of how Coming to the Table was born.
Thank you for that. I didn't read that much about the organization beforehand because I wanted to hear it kind of fresh from the two of you. Cathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I think at last count, there are about 50 chapters across the United States and in the Virgin Islands. And I believe, Venetia may know this better than I, but there may also be a virtual community so that anyone anywhere in the world or across the country who may not be located near one of the chapters can attend. And since we're all virtual now, or ours is anyway, our Montgomery County, we have had people call in from New Jersey and Georgia and Michigan. We have a regular person who calls in from Southern Virginia just because Maryland is the area that her enslaving ancestors lived in. So she feels connected to our group because of that. And prior to COVID, about every 2 years, there would be a national gathering where everybody would come together. At the time it was held in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm not sure where it will be in the future. That's still, I think, being figured out. But that was a time when we could all come together and attend workshops. In fact, Venetia and I and another colleague of ours, Gil Bliss, attended at the last, presented at the one in 2018. And so, you know, we really seek to create community, both at the national level and at the local group level, because that's where the healing happens. I can be reading everything I possibly can on my own about the history of the United States and racism in the United States, but really until I get with other people who have experienced this experience in whatever way they had, either being enslaved is in their family history, or being enslavers, or for many people both. It's really in the community where we get to heal. And because Venetia and I are both healers in our life outside Coming to the Table, I think our particular Coming to the Table group may focus a little on healing, perhaps more than others, because that's what we do. That's who we are.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what a perfect fit that must be for the two of you, because you have all these other skills to use. Because and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I would imagine there's some tense moments, there's some uncomfortable moments, there's some highly uncomfortable moments, there's guilt, there's shame, there's all of that. And it's nice to have someone there to just say something that can kind of, you know, give people maybe another way to look at things. And I want to talk in a little bit about some of the things that you do within the meetings and how how you bring all this about. But Venetia, I have to tell you that we're here doing this interview because Cathy also sent me those same emails. I was on your old email list, I guess, and you just kept sending them. And I kept going, that's really interesting. I know some people who would like that. I'm thinking Montgomery County, it was in person then. So, but I'm probably not going to drive to down there, especially during the week, in rush hour and all that stuff. And yet I kept putting it in a folder for the magazine. I'm going to get in touch with Cathy. I want to do something with this. And so now I'm really feeling called to participate in some form, and we'll see what that looks like. But to show up at one of your online meetings, just to sit there and kind of take it all in and see what it's all about. So glad you were persistent with that email, Cathy.
Yeah, you're welcome to attend.
That's right. We will be happy to see you at the table.
Okay,
Yes.
I'd love to come to the table. What are some of the activities and opportunities that the meetings provide? And you'll speak to your meeting, which is, we'll have people listening from all over, but they can find out about their meeting, or they can find out they could come to your meeting virtually if they wanted to do that. So what's if there's such a thing as a typical meeting, what would that look like? Or is there no such thing as a typical meeting? Who wants to take that one?
You want to start?
Okay. Well, a typical meeting starts off with what we call a circle process. Coming to the table uses a circle process. Well, let me back up. The organization works toward racial justice and equity through a restorative lens, and using a circle process and touchstones or guidelines as a baseline to create a space in which participants feel safe and motivated to do the work. So we generally start off with going over the mission, vision, and values and these guidelines that will navigate the conversation before we even dive into whatever the topic is for the evening. And as we go through this ritual, it sort of sets the support in this space for us to listen from the heart and speak from the heart. And as we do that, we become one in the space. And then it is easier to move and navigate through the conversations because, as you alluded to earlier, during these conversations, sometimes very difficult and sensitive things come up. And, and often our space is the only area where a person can feel free to share some of these things that are coming up for them, some of the shame, the guilt, or the difficult conversations, or not being able to speak with family members or friends about these topics. So that is sort of how we get our meetings going every month.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And we follow a format. So for regular attendees, it's predictable. We have a beginning check-in that we use each time and an ending check-in that we use each time, and questions in between. So most of our meetings have been circle process meetings. We've had guest speakers. Our original, the first meeting was a speaker, a young woman who'd done a lot of research, young white woman who'd done a lot of research on her family's history in Rockville. One of, I think, our most moving and highly attended meetings was 6 or 7 Black men who had grown up in different parts of the United States, all during Jim Crow. The youngest was 71 at the time that we had the meeting. I think it was 2019. I think it was March 2019. And the oldest was in his 90s. And they talked about the different experiences that they had had growing up. We went to a movie together once and talked about it, and we in person, and we also participated in recently a movie that was shown in conjunction with with 2 of the California Coming to the Table group. So, and we collaborate. We collaborated with the Northern Virginia group as well. So we reach out to other groups. We do have in-person things coming up for people who are in the Washington, Baltimore area in June and July. We will be at Montgomery County Heritage Days at Button Farm in Germantown, Maryland. And again, we'll be having a Coming to the Table family picnic in July, also in Germantown at Button Farm, which is a beautiful sacred spot, which we love. And but yes, things come up in the meetings, and sometimes they're deep and there's intensity, and sometimes things come up that we feel like we have to gently confront. So sometimes we're, my motto is, we don't know what we don't know. And especially, I guess everybody, but in particular, I share this with white people because we've grown up in a particular system where there are things we see and things we've been taught not to see.
Right.
And when we get together, sometimes that what we've been taught not to see comes up in ways that can be offensive or harmful or something else. And so sometimes, we kind of walk this line so that we can gently confront and call the person into conversation about it. We use the words oops and ouch. When we hear something that is harmful, anybody in the circle can say ouch and then explain why it was an ouch, and then it gets to be dealt with. And if I say something and then I realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, maybe that's harmful, I can say oops, and and then it can start a conversation. So I get to learn more because we're constantly learning, and we're constantly growing and learning what we don't know about ourselves.
And unlearning.
And unlearning.
And also together, we share personal, family, and community histories. We seek to connect across racial lines in order to develop and deepen relationships. And I just like to add, we also had a council member come brief our group to give us an update on the, what was the?
Montgomery County has a racial equity policy where
Right.
all county legislation has to go through a racial equity lens.
Right. And he, Councilman Glass, gave us an update on that policy. And we also participated in Montgomery County social justice community forum. I can't recall the name of the group now, but in 2019, Montgomery County was seeking information from the community on how to approach social justice work or how to be more equitable. And our group submitted a great deal of information as a part of that. I can't remember, what was it called?
Yeah, it was circles. The
Social
county-
Justice Community Toolkit. And yes,
Okay.
and it was all about making racial equity a reality. So we gave a lot of input into that, the final report that was, I guess, dispersed.
So you're a community resource in a number of ways
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah.
I think you two inadvertently answered my next two questions, but I want to tell you what they are again, and maybe there's a little bit more to be said about it. The first one was, I believe that it takes time to create trust so that people will open up when it comes to having these conversations about racism, equity, and telling the truth about our country's history. How is that handled? And I think, Venetia, you talked about, how, and Cathy, about how you open the meetings. You have this system, this thing in place that it looks like the same meeting every time, so people start to feel safer there. They also know how, I like the oops and the ouches. That's another very gentle way of calling someone out, just letting them know that this really, you might want to rethink this. But what would you say to a white person who wants to get involved in having these tough conversations, but is afraid that they'll say something wrong, or afraid that they'll be embarrassed about their family history? Because it's one thing to come in and experience it. It's another thing to get them in the room, right? So what would you say to them when they don't even know if they belong there or if they would be welcome there?
Well, welcome to the club. That's what I would say.
Exactly. That's a great
You are
point.
welcome, you belong, and you will make mistakes and you will feel things. And we all do. And we're here to be with you so that you can increase your comfort in having, in living in your body, being who you are with the history you bring, and having conversations out in the world with people you care about or people who you meet. So yeah, it's almost guaranteed that people are going to feel everything you said. And we do, and I do too. I remember attending the white privilege conference. I can't remember what city it was in, but I was in a group of about 90 people, and I said something that was real, it showed how I wasn't seeing the big picture. And I got called in a very kind way and dealt with it. But if that happens, talk to me. I have lived that on many occasions.
Yeah.
So that's how we make progress, is we do things we're afraid to do. And we do them in environments that are safe enough, but we have to be brave.
Right. And we, in our support, we encourage people to allow themselves to feel, but not to stay stuck in that feeling, because we can't change the past. But what we can do is be determined and intentional about doing something different in this moment forward. So we, don't want anyone to stay wrapped in shame and judgment. Feel the feeling because it's there and it's real. But in order to do the work, you have to move past that and be able to still have your feelings and experience what you're experiencing, but not stay there where it may prevent you from doing the work. Yeah. Because I always tell our white members, you can get tired, you can slow down, but you can't stop. You can take a little break, but you can't stop, because this is hard work and it's a heavy lift, but it's long overdue. And just continue to be committed in a way that you can maintain and sustain and not get burned out, because we need everyone in order to heal this history that we've all been descended from.
Yeah. And find a way that works for you. Coming to the table might not be for everyone, but 3 years ago, before COVID, Venetia and I went on a tour of the South with the Maryland Heritage Tour. I can't remember what it's called. Jim Stowe, Montgomery County
The Human Rights Organization.
Yeah, does this tour, and I think he started it up again this year. But we spend 9 days going from Greensboro, North Carolina, just to every major location where something happened in the South. And so that's another way that, somebody might want to do that rather than coming to the table. Somebody else might, I don't know, but there are lots of ways to participate in healing and social justice in this country and in our community. So I really encourage everyone to find a way to do it. We're here for those who are resonating with what we're talking about, but taking those civil rights tours to the South is just an incredible experience. Incredible.
So when someone is feeling like if someone's watching this and they're feeling maybe not necessarily called to show up at one of your meetings, but they're having this idea that I really want to learn more, I really want to do something. That's a given right there that they've kind of gotten it a little bit, that says, oh, there's something to be done here. And maybe I'm the one to do a piece of it, rather than just keeping the blinders on, because awareness is the first step to even, acknowledging anything, right? So just the fact that somebody is now aware that, I don't think there's anybody on the planet who isn't aware of what happened, of the history, but to actually be aware that how it still permeates everything, and that no matter who you are, you can have an impact on that in a positive way. So when people start to actually get that, then that's the time, I think, to start to think about, how can I take some action, right? Don't try to force yourself into something. Again, you don't want people showing up because they feel so guilty that they're going to, not be able to get out of that for a while. You don't want to have to therapize people through a whole meeting, right?
Right.
So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here because I've got all these thoughts going through my head, but it's like, I think people should give themselves a tiny bit of credit for at least going, oh, I see this, I hear this now, and what's my next step?
Uh-huh.
Rather than just, oh, this doesn't apply to me, or yeah, that's, but yeah, it's, shouldn't we get past that? Shouldn't we be past that by now? Continue to think those things. Does that make
Right.
sense, what I just said?
Right. And it applies to everyone, even those who are descendants of immigrants to this country. It applies to them as well, because as the immigrants came into the country, they had to acclimate to the society that was already established in this country,
Mhm.
with all the structural racism already embedded. So they were contributing also to the harms,
Mhm.
quite, potentially. And so it affects everyone. Some people think because their family were immigrants that it doesn't affect them, but yes, it affects everyone, because people were complacent and complicit in the system that was already established here.
Right.
So we all need to heal from this system.
That's very well said. I agree with that fully. I didn't even know I didn't know that. I didn't even know I needed to know that. Which is the interesting thing about this work, is like, wow, I never thought of it like that before. But thank you. Did you want to say something, Cathy?
Yeah, I did. And that is, it really tags along with what you had just said, Jenny and Venetia as well. And, so often we'll hear, especially, I think this is true maybe in liberal and progressive communities, people feel like, oh, I've got this. I've heard so many people tell me, especially people older than me, they marched with Martin Luther King, and, they just feel like, oh, I've got this. And maybe you do more than maybe some other people do. And I think accepting that maybe none of us really has this completely.
Yeah.
And what if we start there, like accepting that there's a way that this system lives in me and you and all of us, that it exists and it's harmful. And if we use that as our starting point and then begin to get curious about, well, how have I been complicit in this? And, how am I still being complicit in this? We had a woman, a Black woman asked a great question in our book club. We forgot to mention that. We do a book group that meets about every second month. And after one of our books, one of the Black women, who was the only Black woman on the call, said, well, what are y'all going to do with this that you're reading? What are you going to do with this information you're getting? And I just thought that was such a great question. It's like, okay, we're reading this book, we're talking about it, but how's it going to transform us as people, being people, and then as we be inside ourselves, we are different out in the world. Because Venetia and I have always talked with groups about, top down. If that were going to work, it would have worked. Because look at all the movement forward progress of the civil rights era in legal and judicial movements. But racism still exists, bias still exists. So it's really going to start as each person looks at how they are complying with this system and really begins to question themselves about what they're doing, how they think, what they believe, how they feel when they're walking down the street and they pass a particular person or a particular group or a mixed race couple or any of the other kind of things that people might have a reaction to, and begin to, instead of pushing that down and suppressing that and feeling bad or guilty or not wanting to think about it, just get curious about it. Right? Well, wow, what was that? Why did I think that? Why did I feel that in my body? And that's how we can begin to move forward. That's the kind of stuff we love to do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I was laughing inside a little bit when you started talking about, progressives who start to think, and, I know I've kind of patted myself on the back a few times silently and said, well,
Sure.
at least I knew that, you know what I mean? Just that, or I read that book, or
Right.
I was talking about that well before they were. I mean, just that ego stuff comes into it, doesn't it?
Exactly. Ego stuff comes into it. And we get to interrogate that ourselves.
Yeah. And I think it's also this maybe for me, I think it was also this discomfort with not really having done much of anything with it. Like the woman asked that question, well, what are you going to do with this information now? Well, yeah, I read the books, but I read the books with a bunch of white people, and I've had these conversations with a bunch of white people. Not that I do have a lot of Black people in my world. So, and we have these hard conversations, but I really don't feel like I've taken that much action in a way that would look like action to me. It might look like action to somebody else. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that question, and I love that that little discomfort that came up for me again that said, oh yeah, I think I'm one of those people you're talking about a little bit. So
Right.
There are some really great trainings. Patty Dye, D-I-G-H. Can I mention things like this on here?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Patty Dye, D-I-G-H. I don't know if she's still doing trainings, but I took her training. I can't remember whether it was 2 weeks or a month long, but every night I was watching 2 hours of videos, and it was powerful. I just soaked all of this in. And the beauty of that is that we get to really learn and take it in, and it becomes a part of us, so that when we move out in the world, we're slightly different. Are we perfect? Are we complete? No, but we're able to come from a different place. And there are other groups that do online trainings as well. So people who are kind of tiptoeing into it, not sure they want to be in a group like Venetia and I have, where we're looking at each other and talking with each other, but maybe want to do something on their own. Just Google, there are all kinds of trainings out there that you could get.
So I think the key here is do something.
Do something.
Just do
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Just
Take
yes.
that first step.
I always advise people, just commit to something small at first, but something that you can stick with. And then as you become more comfortable, then expand your commitment to something greater. Because some people want to sometimes jump in and do something big, and then they don't have the motivation to stay with it. So if you start small and then gradually expand, chances are you're going to be motivated to stick with it, and then be contributing to, racial reconciliation, instead of jumping in, and then when it gets difficult, you back out. We need everyone to stay at the table. And I also want to add that for people who are not sure about coming to the table, if they want to be a part of one of the local affiliates, the organizational website, comingtothetable.org, has a wealth of information on the website, and people can peruse the site to see if something speaks to them or not, because the Coming to the Table offers training, support, and leadership, and a reading list of books, and all of this with the intention to acknowledge and heal from racism rooted in the U.S. history of slavery. So I would just urge people to go visit the Coming to the Table website and see if anything speaks to you, because there is a lot of information out there.
I will put that website address in the comments of this live so that people can pick it up. That was my plan, was to take some time this weekend and go over there, now that I've talked with the two of you, to kind of dig in and see what else I can learn. We're about to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask you about the Zoom meetings. I guess yours or.
Ginny, could I say one other thing?
Oh, you sure
before we
can,
wrap
yes.
up? Okay, actually, it's two. One is the national organization also has meditation on Sundays, and that might be what somebody wants to do. And sometimes Venetia is one of the facilitators for it. But the whole thing about do something always has me wanting to make a comment. And sometimes when white people in particular want to do something, it's a paternalistic sort of doing to help
Yes.
people of color. And so I just want to say something about, doing your own work and letting what flows come from that, rather than going out and doing something
To try to fix it.
yes.
And avoid the savior mentality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, the work has to be done. If we don't do the work to start with the work inside, we'll never make it to the other stuff.
Yeah.
Be doing the other stuff in a very superficial way. But there is that savior mentality sometimes to, go fix it. I can fix it. I know people. I can, and I think we all have had that at some point in our lives where we wanted to do something, but yet it looked like, in fact, one of the, Andrea Hyland, I think, don't you, Cathy?
Yeah.
Andrea has been writing a series of articles for the magazine called Taboo Topics. And one of them was called Dismantling Racism. And then the last one, the one this month, is called White Fragility.
Mhm.
And so she's doing these things. One was on mental illness. And so they're just, different topics that people don't necessarily want to talk about. And she mentioned in the one on dismantling racism that she had gotten information about this. There's this organization, I think, of Black women who run, the runners. And they were putting on this event, and she knew one of the women, and they told her about it. And next thing Andrea knows, she's trying to do this, and she's inviting all these people. And she's like, and she stepped back and went, wait a minute. I think my only role here is I'm not even going to show up to this. I don't even think I want to show up to this. I'm going to ask them what I can do behind the scenes. But she'd gotten in her head already that she was, trying to like fix things or trying to just physically do things when it was clearly the job of the other women to do it. So that was a real great awareness for her, which made me, aware again and think about that. So there's so many of those places that we do things that have just been so natural and reactive, that, stepping back and going, I can see, even reading, I knew what she was talking about when I read it from her perspective. I went, oh, now I really get what that means.
That's great that she caught herself.
Yeah.
And was able to just, say, wait, that's not mine to do.
I
Yeah.
don't think she used the term savior, but it was that same kind of thing that she was going to go in and really help. So I wasn't going to just kick you guys off when I said we're about ready to wrap up. I wanted to get some final words of wisdom, but the question, this is mainly for me. When I show up at my first meeting, is it okay to show up and just observe? It can't. Okay, but okay. I just wanted to know the lay of the land. Okay, so everybody says something.
But the space is very supportive.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, we have guidelines that we all agree upon to navigate the conversations, and it's all voluntary. So you can pass, but you must participate. But you can pass if you don't feel comfortable or ready to answer a question, or when it's your turn, because we, as Cathy mentioned earlier, we use a circle process. And just imagine a talking stick going around from person to person. So when it's your turn, if you're not ready, you can pass and then share at the end of the round.
Yeah.
It's a very welcoming and supportive group. So when a new person shows up, they do not feel as if they're on the spot or they have to they're forced to answer
Come
questions
up with
or
something brilliant to say.
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's
the ego, starts to go, oh, I want to like,
Show up and be yourself.
Yeah.
right.
That's what we want. And we've had other people ask the same question who want to do something like this in their organization.
Mhm.
And we let them know they're welcome to come and learn and see how we do it and participate while they're
I could see why you wouldn't
volunteering.
want someone to just sit there and not do anything. That's uncomfortable right there for everybody.
We
And
even
who
had a
doesn't do
reporter
anything?
who was writing an article and wanted to just come and sit. She ended up participating and loving it.
Mhm.
So we
Right.
we do request that people be willing to participate
Okay.
as much as you can.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Final words from either of you or both of you about this work, why it matters. Just whatever you want to say to leave our audience with.
I think it's essential. I think it's something that one of my favorite authors on the topic of racism is Resmaa Menakem, a social worker from Minneapolis. And he wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands, which is a beautiful place. I will recommend it, anybody who wants to start somewhere. But he talks about, he's also a somatic therapist, and he talks about how racism lives in our bodies. And as we become more in our bodies, we notice more about how racism is living in our bodies, and we can be more fully in ourselves and more present in our world. And that's my final word. I just thank you so much that we have this opportunity to have this conversation with your community. I'm really grateful, Jenny.
And I'd like to add that coming to the table is a growing community of descendants of the enslaved and the enslavers. And we're working together to break down the divisions, the barriers, and to heal the wounds of the nation and the wounds in ourselves. So that is going to be an ongoing process. And that's why we need everyone to participate and do their work, not show up to fix someone else, but show up to do your own inner work. Because when you do your work, then that helps the collective. And then I'll just end with one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Maya Angelou: do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better.
Yeah, I love that. I do want to be clear on something. This isn't just for people who know that they are descended from enslavers and slaves, correct? It's
Right.
for anyone who just wants to be part of something.
That's right.
And we've had people attend our meetings that were not descended from enslavers or the enslaved, that are descended from immigrants or new, first or second generation to the country. So we get a wide variety of people interested because it affects everyone.
Right.
And it doesn't matter who you are. This history affects us all. And the fact that we haven't been told about it, and some people find out when they go through a musty trunk in the attic and they find these documents and they're horrified, or some family member may do some research and something pops up, because we get a lot of people who want to do the research as well to link with their descendants. So yes, it's just important that people bring themselves there and they're willing to do the work.
Thank you. Well, gosh, Venetia and Cathy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to be with me today, and for this super important work that you're doing with Coming to the Table. And I know it just ripples out, and everybody that comes, I'm sure something ripples out and affects something else, which affects something else. And that's really the only way we ever get anything changed, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone else for joining us for the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show live in the On Purpose Women Global Community and Magazine Facebook page. If you love this interview and you want to share it with your friends, it will be on our YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. So go over to On Purpose Woman Global Community on YouTube, subscribe, and sign up for notifications. There are close to 100 inspiring, informative, and fun shows for you to watch on our channel. Our next show is Tuesday, May 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, when Catherine Yarborough, the other host of the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show, will chat with 3 to 4 of her friends about speaking on a big stage, what it's like, and how do you prepare to get there. So thank you again for watching the Real Women, Real Purpose talk show.
Thank